You ever make a choice you know will change everything, even as the world watches and waits for you to fail? That's how
Easy
it
now,
was for
Junebug.
Charlotte
You're all
Walker,
right.
standing on
Come
the
on, girl.
sun-baked dirt of Bitter
That's
Mesa's
it.
old livestock arena with the July heat pressing in. She was 38, a widow for nearly 2 years, hair going gray at the temples too soon, boots dusty, stubborn chin lifted, refusing to let the ache in her chest or the whispers in the crowd break her. Bitter Mesa had a way of chewing folks up. The ranch Charlotte ran was all she had left, and even that was slipping from her fingers. Taxes overdue, fences leaning, cattle numbers shrinking. But Charlotte had Ruby, 13 years old, wild as a colt, freckles dancing across her nose, and eyes too old for her years since her daddy died. That auction, everyone would remember it. Charlotte standing at the edge of the ring with the last of her savings folded in a worn envelope. She watched as the auctioneer, old Harry Montoya, voice cracked from decades of dust and deals, rattled off numbers for a string of ragged horses. Most folks weren't interested in what came next. 4 thin, neglected creatures, heads hanging, manes tangled, coats marked by years of hard luck. The last was a gray mare with a scar down her left flank and a look in her eye like she'd seen ghosts. "Lot 42, Harry bellowed, banging his gavel. "Set of 4, sold as a group. Who'll start me at 50? No one moved. Laughter rippled in the crowd. Whispers about fools and charity. Ruby tugged at Charlotte's shirt. "Mom, let's go. These horses are broken." Charlotte didn't answer. Something about the gray mare drew her. A memory surfaced, sharp and sudden. Her late husband, Tom, laughing as he rode through the fields on a gray mare, back before sorrow settled on their house. 100, Charlotte said, voice steady, though her hand shook. The crowd went silent. Then someone, Luke Briggs, her neighbor with the hungry eyes, called out, "You sure you got that much left, Charlotte? Hate to see you lose the ranch and your pride." Charlotte's cheeks burned. She squared her shoulders. 100, she repeated. The bidding died before it started. No one else wanted those horses, not at any price. Harry shrugged, brought the gavel down. "Sold to Charlotte Walker." Ruby stared at her mother, eyes wide. "Mom, what are we going to do?" "We're going to take them home," Charlotte said, swallowing the fear in her throat. "And give them a chance." It took nearly an hour to coax the horses into the battered trailer. The gray mare balked, nostrils flaring, hooves skittering on the ramp. Charlotte murmured soft words, voice trembling, but didn't let go. Finally, the mare stepped forward, as if surrendering to fate. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was sliding low, painting Bitter Mesa gold. The barn, old but sturdy, built by Tom's own hands, stood waiting. Ruby slid open the doors, and Charlotte led the horses into fresh stalls, throwing down clean hay. The other 3, a chestnut gelding, a little dun pony, and a sway-backed black, settled quickly, heads down, exhausted. The gray mare remained apart, watching Charlotte with haunted eyes. Ruby paced the aisle. "They're so skinny. Do you think they'll make it?" Charlotte pressed a hand to Ruby's back. "We'll do what we can. That's all anybody can do." They worked in silence, pulling burrs from manes, checking for wounds. It was Ruby who found the faded brass nameplate on the gray's old halter. She wiped the dust away. "Junebug," she read, voice soft. Charlotte froze. Her knees went weak, memory colliding with the present. Tom's voice echoed in her mind. "Junebug's the best horse I ever owned. She'll outlive us all. But Junebug was lost years ago, presumed dead in a flood. Charlotte blinked back tears. "Mom, do you know her?" Ruby asked. Charlotte nodded, barely trusting herself to speak. "Your dad. She was his favorite. I never thought I'd see her again." Outside, the night settled in, cicadas singing their lonely song. Inside the barn, Charlotte and Ruby huddled beside Junebug, the mare still trembling but allowing Charlotte's hand to rest on her neck. The old pain in Charlotte's chest, grief, loss, regret, shifted, just a little, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But hope was a dangerous thing in Bitter Mesa. As darkness pressed in, and the whispers of the town grew sharper, Charlotte understood what she'd done. She'd spent her last dime on a gamble, invited more scorn, more risk, more uncertainty. But as Junebug pressed her nose gently into Charlotte's palm, Charlotte knew she'd do it again. Because sometimes, when the shadows gather, it's the lost and broken things that save you. And as the wind howled across the mesa, carrying with it old secrets and new beginnings, Charlotte Walker made a silent promise. No matter what the town said, no matter what ghosts haunted her doorstep, she would fight. For her daughter, for her ranch, for Junebug, and for the memory of the man she loved. Tomorrow, the hard work would begin. Tonight, all that mattered was that, against all odds, hope had come home. The night after the auction was thick with restlessness. Every creak of the barn, every rustle in the hay, seemed sharper than usual, as if the shadows themselves were listening. Charlotte barely slept. She kept replaying the image of Junebug, Tom's long-lost mare, her eyes wild, body trembling with fear, as if haunted by things only she could see. Before sunrise, Charlotte was already pulling on her boots. She moved quietly, not wanting to wake Ruby, who had finally dozed off, clutching a photograph of her father and Junebug. In the kitchen, Charlotte found her hands shaking as she poured coffee. What had she really brought home last night? Just a few broken-down horses, or something more troubling? Outside, Bitter Mesa was waking, the sky painted pale lavender. The horses in the barn sensed Charlotte before she even reached them. The chestnut gelding stamped nervously. The little dun pony shied from the pitchfork leaning against the wall. The sway-backed black snorted, eyes wide and white-rimmed. But it was Junebug who made Charlotte's heart ache. She huddled in the farthest corner of her stall, shivering, refusing food and water, ears flicking at every sound. Charlotte spoke softly, crouching at the gate. "Easy, girl. You're safe now, I promise." Her words fell flat. Junebug wouldn't even meet her gaze. She fed the horses and checked them for injuries, her mind churning. Why were these animals so afraid? Where had they been all these years? Charlotte had expected them to be thin, wary, but this was deeper, like they'd been running from nightmares. Ruby appeared in the doorway, hair tangled, face pale. "I heard something last night," she whispered. Like someone was outside. Charlotte stilled, the coffee cup halfway to her lips. It was probably just the wind, or a coyote. But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. Ruby stared at Junebug. "She looks worse today. Do you think she remembers Dad?" Charlotte's voice was gentle. "Horses don't forget the ones they love, not ever." She stroked Ruby's hair, feeling how thin her daughter's shoulders had grown under all the worry. Rumors were already swirling in Bitter Mesa. By noon, Mrs. Depew Greer had driven up in her rattling Ford to drop off some old oats and news. I heard folks at the cafe saying those horses were cursed, she confided, unloading the feed. Something about ghosts and bad luck. And you know how people talk when they're bored. Her eyes softened. Don't let 'em get to you, Charlotte. This town feeds on secrets. Charlotte managed a weak smile. Thanks, Mrs. Greer. We'll be fine. But Ruby, wide-eyed, pressed for more. What kind of ghosts? Mrs. Greer sighed, her face creasing into 100 memories. Some say those horses were caught up in an old feud, disappeared the same week as the Briggs' big fire. Folks blame your daddy for all sorts of things. None of it proven, of course. But superstitions stick. Charlotte set her jaw. My Tom never hurt anybody. He loved Junebug. If there's a curse, it's on whoever took these horses, not us. After Mrs. Greer left, Ruby pestered Charlotte all afternoon. We have to find out what happened, Mom. There's got to be a reason they're all so scared. Charlotte wanted to say she agreed, but fear tangled in her chest. What if the truth was worse than the gossip? What if bringing those horses here put Ruby in danger? As the afternoon faded, Charlotte busied herself cleaning the tack room, trying to restore some order. That's when she found it. A scrap of paper tucked inside Tom's old toolbox, yellowed and brittle. She recognized his handwriting instantly, the strong slant of his letters. The note was brief, almost frantic. If anything happens, trust Junebug. Briggs knows more than he lets on. Protect Ruby. Forgive me if I can't come back. Charlotte stared at the words, her hands trembling. She hadn't seen this note before, hadn't even known Tom kept secrets. What did Luke Briggs have to do with any of this? Just then, Ruby's shout rang out from the barn. Mom, come quick, something's wrong with Junebug. Charlotte rushed outside, heart pounding. Junebug was thrashing in her stall, eyes rolling, sides heaving. It took both Charlotte and Ruby to calm her, using soft words and gentle touches. Only when Charlotte started humming the old lullaby Tom used to sing did Junebug finally quiet, head drooping, body quivering with exhaustion. Ruby knelt in the straw, tears in her eyes. Why would anyone hurt her mom? Who could be so cruel? Charlotte pulled her daughter close. I don't know yet, but we'll find out. That night, the sense of unease grew heavier. Charlotte double-checked the locks and tried to convince herself she was being paranoid. She sat at the kitchen table, the note from Tom laid out before her, and stared at it until the words blurred. It was past midnight when the dogs began to bark, a sharp, frantic sound that sent Charlotte stumbling from her chair. She grabbed the old shotgun by the door and dashed outside, Ruby close behind. Moonlight painted the barn silver. The doors stood wide open. Inside, chaos reigned, tack strewn everywhere, feed spilled, Junebug's stall door broken off its hinges. Someone had been here. Someone had wanted to send a message. Ruby clung to Charlotte's arm. Mom, who would do this? Charlotte's voice came out as a whisper. Someone who's afraid of what we'll find out. Someone who wants us gone. She gathered Ruby in her arms, holding her tight. The cold night air bit through her shirt, but she barely felt it. Her eyes searched the darkness for movement, for any sign of who had come. But the only answer was the wind, moaning through the barn rafters, carrying the secrets of Bitter Mesa. As she locked up the barn once more, Charlotte's resolve hardened. She had made a promise, to herself, to Ruby, to Tom's memory. She would uncover the truth behind Junebug's suffering, behind the missing years and the curses and the lies. And if Bitter Mesa wanted a fight, then she was ready. because some ghosts only disappear when you shine a light on them. The sun rose gentle and gold over Bitter Mesa, its first rays slipping quietly through the gaps in the barn walls. For the first time in a long while, Charlotte allowed herself to just stand and breathe in the soft light, listening to the slow, living rhythm of horses munching hay and the distant murmur of waking birds. After the night's chaos, she needed this fragile peace, even if she knew it wouldn't last. Inside the barn, the air was heavy with exhaustion and hope. The mess from the break-ins still lingered, shattered tack, spilled grain, deep dents in the old stall door. But there was also a quiet determination, almost palpable. Ruby was already there, curled up beside Junebug's stall, legs tucked under her, whispering to the mare as she offered a handful of oats. At first, Junebug shied away, trembling at every sound, but Ruby waited, patient as sunrise, her small hand outstretched, palm up. She started humming under her breath. Not even aware she was doing it, a tune Charlotte recognized as the lullaby Tom used to sing. After a long while, Junebug stretched out her neck and nibbled the oats, her eyes still wary but less wild than before. Charlotte watched from the shadows, her heart both aching and mending at once. The other horses were skittish, clustered together for comfort, but there was a new calmness in the barn. Maybe it was just exhaustion, or maybe the animals could sense that, this time. They wouldn't be abandoned. When Ruby saw her mom, she stood up quickly, brushing straw from her jeans. "I was talking to her all night, Mom. I think she's starting to trust me. She let me brush her mane a little. I think she knows we're not going to hurt her." Charlotte stepped in, kneeling beside her daughter. She stroked Junebug's forehead, slow and steady. "Trust takes time," she murmured, glancing at Ruby, "but you're doing everything right." Animals know when someone means well. They spent that morning cleaning the barn together. The work was familiar, grounding. Charlotte mended the broken latch with what little hardware she had left, while Ruby swept the aisles and gently brushed out the manes of all 4 horses. The chestnut gelding flinched at every sudden move, but by midday, he accepted a soft pat on the neck. The little dun pony, curious and cautious, started following Ruby around like a shadow. It was quiet, peaceful, so much so that the memories came, slow and bittersweet. Ruby broke the silence first. "Mom, do you ever get scared?" Her voice was so small, so raw, that Charlotte felt the question in her bones. Charlotte set down the hammer and wiped her brow. "Yeah, honey. More than I'd like to admit. But I figure being scared means you got something worth holding on to." Ruby sat down beside her, hugging her knees. "After Dad, after everything, I just get scared you'll leave too. Or that something bad's gonna happen again." Charlotte wrapped an arm around Ruby's shoulders. "I'm not going anywhere, okay? Not if I can help it. And we're gonna get through this. You and me, just like always." They sat that way for a while, letting the horses settle around them, letting the world shrink down to the size of the barn. Outside, the wind carried with it rumors and judgment, but inside was a bubble of fragile safety. Around noon, Mrs. Greer appeared, as she often did, carrying a basket of scones and a thermos of weak coffee. She looked over the barn with sharp, knowing eyes, then set her basket down on a bale of hay. "Thought you two might need a little something," she said, pouring coffee into battered tin mugs. "And I brought some of that liniment you used to like, Charlotte. Good for aches, yours and the horses." Charlotte smiled, accepting the mug. "Thank you, Mrs. Greer." We're a little battered, but still standing. Mrs. Greer sat herself on an upturned bucket, her hands folded over her cane. These old horses remind me of the ones your Tom used to ride when he was a boy. Stubborn, but good-hearted. You know, he once told me June Bug was smarter than half the men in town. Ruby grinned at that. She's the bravest horse I've ever seen, even when she's scared. Mrs. Greer's gaze softened. She's been through hell and back, no mistake. But horses heal, sometimes faster than people do. She looked at Charlotte, her tone gentle. Grief don't go away overnight. You let yourself feel it, honey. But don't let it keep you from loving what you've still got. After Mrs. Greer left, the rest of the day passed in slow, deliberate routines. Charlotte and Ruby moved from one quiet task to another, cleaning water troughs, picking hooves, washing out feed buckets. Each action was a step toward normalcy, a promise that life would go on. By sundown, the barn glowed with a new energy. The horses dozed in their stalls, bellies full, coats brushed clean. Charlotte and Ruby shared a simple dinner in the barn aisle. Bread, cheese, scones, and apples pilfered from Mrs. Greer's basket. The conversation drifted from memories of Tom to stories of when June Bug was just a colt, full of mischief and speed. Later, as Charlotte tucked Ruby into bed, she noticed a change in her daughter. A lightness, a small sense of peace returning. Ruby clutched the old photograph of Tom and June Bug, but didn't cry this time. Instead, she whispered, "We're going to be okay, aren't we, Mom?" Charlotte kissed her forehead. "Yeah, Ruby, we are." Outside, the night settled soft and quiet over Bitter Mesa. For the first time in ages, Charlotte felt something like hope. Maybe the world wasn't done breaking them yet, but they were learning, slowly, to put the pieces back together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in the silence, surrounded by the steady breathing of horses and the heartbeat of her daughter, Charlotte let herself believe that healing was possible, even here, even now. Morning light crept softly into the tack room, turning dust motes to gold. Charlotte was already at work, her hands moving through familiar motions, wiping down bridles, folding blankets, sorting brushes into neat rows. These chores, simple and repetitive, gave her a sense of control when so much else felt uncertain. Ruby joined her, yawning, hair tangled, cheeks pink from sleep. She carried an armful of old tack, mildewed halters, cracked leather reins, things left to molder since before Tom's death. They worked side by side in companionable silence until Ruby, nosy as ever, started poking through the old trunks stacked in the corner. "Mom, what's in here?" she asked, dragging a heavy wooden chest into the middle of the room. Charlotte smiled. Probably just more junk. But her curiosity got the better of her. She knelt beside Ruby and popped the rusty latches. Inside, they found a jumble of odds and ends, faded show ribbons, half-empty bottles of hoof oil, a handful of battered photographs. At the very bottom was a thick, leather-bound journal, the cover stained and cracked. Ruby's eyes lit up. "Is that Dad's?" Charlotte nodded, running her fingers over Tom's handwriting on the inside cover. For a moment, she was back in a simpler time. Before the fire, before the loss, before the rumors and the hard stares from neighbors. She handed the journal to Ruby. They sat together, flipping through the pages. Tom's entries were full of life and color, even in his messy scrawl. There were notes about ranch repairs, stories of lost calves found safe at dawn, and memories of wild rides across Bitter Mesa. There were sketches, too. Quick pencil drawings of horses, the land, even Charlotte and Ruby, and there were pages devoted entirely to June Bug. Her quirks, her favorite treats, how she'd once saved Tom from a rattlesnake by refusing to move forward on a trail. Ruby pointed to a photograph tucked between the pages. "That's us." In the photo, a younger Ruby perched atop June Bug, grinning, while Tom stood beside them, one hand resting on the mare's neck, the other on Ruby's back. Charlotte's throat tightened. The image radiated happiness, innocence, safety, all the things she wanted to protect. They kept finding more pictures. Tom holding up a blue ribbon. Charlotte with her arms slung around his shoulders, a group shot at a 4th of July picnic. The ranch looked alive in those images, not battered and faded like now. Ruby brushed her fingers over a picture of Tom and June Bug running together. "I wish I remembered more," she said quietly. Charlotte squeezed her hand. "Your dad loved this place. He loved you, more than anything. Even when things got tough, he always said the ranch was about family, not fences or cattle." For the rest of the morning, they cleaned and sorted, but every few minutes, Ruby stopped to read a passage aloud or show Charlotte another photo. The journal became a bridge, connecting them to Tom and to each other. As the barn filled with light, so too did Charlotte's spirit. She told Ruby stories Tom had shared, about the summer storms that nearly washed the fences away, about how June Bug once outran a mountain lion, about the night Tom proposed under a sky full of shooting stars. They laughed, cried, and laughed again, the hard edge of grief softened by shared memory. By noon, the tack room was transformed. Saddles gleamed with fresh oil, halters hung neatly on the wall, and the smell of lemon soap overpowered the old must and dust. Ruby taped some of the photos above the workbench, creating a little gallery, a tribute to the past, a promise for the future. They settled into a gentle routine over the next few days. Mornings were for chores and care, feeding the horses, brushing them, mucking stalls. June Bug, once so wary, began greeting Ruby with a soft nicker. The chestnut gelding stood patiently for grooming, and even the sway-backed black let Charlotte rub his nose. In the quiet afternoons, Ruby read more from Tom's journal, asking questions about the people and places he mentioned. Sometimes, Mrs. Greer would stop by with a pie or a jar of pickles, sitting on the porch to swap stories about Tom's wild youth. "He was a rascal," she'd say, shaking her head, "but he loved hard, and he loved this land." She watched Charlotte and Ruby work, her gaze fond. "You two are doing him proud." The pain didn't vanish. There were still nights Charlotte woke from dreams of fire, loss, and loneliness. She'd stand at the window, looking out over the moonlit fields, searching for something she couldn't name. But every morning brought new purpose. There was always a stall to clean, a wound to check, a memory to cherish. One evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the mesa in fire and gold, Ruby turned to Charlotte, her eyes wide with hope. "Do you think we can make the ranch like it was before?" Charlotte considered her answer, then nodded. "It won't ever be the same, honey, but it can be good again. Maybe even better. If we're brave enough to keep going." Ruby grinned. "Then let's do it, Mom. For Dad. For us. For the horses." Charlotte hugged her daughter, holding her close. The world outside was still full of whispers and wounds, but inside their little bubble, there was healing, laughter, and love. Each piece of the past they reclaimed became a stone in the foundation of something new, a future built not just on survival, but on hope. and as dusk fell over Bitter Mesa, Charlotte knew they were on their way back, one gentle step at a time. It started with a whisper, drifting out from the Bitter Mesa cafe, caught on the breeze and swept across town like prairie fire. Charlotte felt it long before she heard it. Neighbors who once offered smiles now turned away, eyes hard or averted. She'd been living under the weight of grief for so long, she barely noticed at first. But the pressure grew day by day, coiling in the pit of her stomach, until she couldn't ignore it. It was a Thursday morning when Mrs. Greer came by again, pie in one hand and a furrow of worry on her brow. She set the pie on the porch and hesitated, as if the next words might turn to glass in her mouth. "Honey, I heard folks down at the store saying things that weren't kind," she finally confessed. "It's about your Tom. About those horses. You know how people get when they smell a story." Charlotte nodded. "What are they saying?" Mrs. Greer squeezed her hand. "That he was mixed up in something he shouldn't have been. That he stole those horses. Some are saying you're covering for him, protecting a thief. I told them to hush, but—" Charlotte's heart thudded. "But it won't stop." Mrs. Greer shook her head. "Luke Briggs is stirring the pot, I think. He's always had a grudge since Tom outbid him on that land years back." Charlotte thanked her and carried the pie inside, her mind racing. By the time Ruby came in from the barn, cheeks smudged with dust, Charlotte was already pacing. "Mom, what's wrong?" Ruby asked, concern sharp in her voice. Charlotte hesitated, not wanting to burden her daughter with adult worries, but Ruby was old enough to understand. "People in town, they're talking. About Dad, about the horses. They think we're hiding something." Ruby's eyes flashed with indignation. "That's not fair. Dad never did anything wrong. Why would they say that?" "People get scared of what they don't understand," Charlotte replied, her tone measured. "But we know the truth, and we'll prove it if we have to." Word came that afternoon. There would be a special meeting at the community hall that night. Charlotte knew what it meant. She dressed in her best jeans and a clean shirt, braiding her hair tight to keep her hands busy. Ruby wanted to come, but Charlotte sent her to Mrs. Greer's just in case things got ugly. The hall was packed, voices low and urgent. Luke Briggs stood at the front, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick gray mustache and a permanent scowl. He fixed Charlotte with a stare as she entered, as if daring her to speak. She didn't flinch. She sat in the front row, arms crossed, every inch the ranch woman she'd become since Tom's death. When the meeting began, Luke's voice boomed across the crowd. "It's about the horses Charlotte Walker brought back from the auction," he said, pacing like a preacher. "Now, I'm not one to gossip, but it seems strange that the same horses who disappeared years ago, when Tom Walker was around, should show up in her barn. Folks, we deserve answers." Charlotte stood, voice steady. "My husband loved those animals. He searched for Junebug every day until he died. He didn't steal anything. Someone took those horses from us. All I did was bring them home when I had the chance." A murmur rose in the crowd. Some faces softened, remembering Tom's kindness. Others looked skeptical, cowed by Luke's bluster. Luke sneered. "Is that so? Then how do you explain the letter from your husband, the one talking about secrets and me? Maybe you're in on it too, Charlotte. Maybe you're hiding something bigger than horses." Charlotte's hands clenched into fists. "That letter is proof Tom was scared. Scared of you, Luke. Maybe we should be asking you where those horses have been all these years." gasps rippled through the room. For a moment, even Luke seemed caught off guard. He recovered quickly, waving her off. "I've done nothing wrong, but if you want to clear your name, maybe you'd better start digging." Charlotte stared him down, jaw set. "I will. And when I find the truth, everyone in Bitter Mesa will know what really happened." After the meeting, the town was split. Some folks whispered their support, quick words, glances over the shoulder, while others crossed the street to avoid her altogether. But a few things were clear. The gossips had latched on, and Luke Briggs was determined to see her fall. That night, Charlotte lay awake, the weight of the town's suspicion pressing down. Ruby snuck into her room, curling up beside her, silent but seeking comfort. Charlotte held her tight, heart pounding with a mix of anger and fear. "I'm not going to let them ruin us," she whispered. "We're going to find the truth." Over the next days, Charlotte and Ruby became investigators. They searched old records in the attic, combed through Tom's journal for clues, and visited neighbors who remembered the old days. Some slammed their doors, others offered bits and pieces, stories about fires, missing horses, bad blood between the Walkers and the Briggs family. It was Ruby who found the first real lead. A crumpled receipt tucked inside one of Tom's old boots, dated the night the horses vanished. The seller's name was blacked out, but the handwriting matched Luke Briggs's blocky scrawl. Charlotte's pulse jumped. They were getting closer. With every step, the risk grew, but so did Charlotte's resolve. She would clear Tom's name, whatever it took. She would show Ruby and Bitter Mesa that some truths were worth fighting for, even when the whole town seemed set against you. And as Charlotte pinned the faded receipt to the corkboard above the kitchen table, she looked out into the gathering dusk, a storm brewing on the horizon. She was no longer just surviving. She was fighting back. The first warning came in the uneasy hush that fell over Bitter Mesa, a silence so thick, even the birds seemed to vanish. Charlotte had grown up reading the land and sky, and she knew this quiet was the kind that came before something big, something fierce. All day, dark clouds crawled over the horizon, stacking higher with every hour. The air was heavy, pressing down on everything. Horses shifted nervously in their stalls, stamping and snorting at each rumble of distant thunder. Charlotte and Ruby spent the morning reinforcing the barn doors, checking that the windows were latched, and gathering lanterns just in case the power failed. But Charlotte's mind wasn't just on the weather. The town's accusations lingered like a storm of their own, brewing inside her chest, threatening to spill over. She saw it in Ruby's drawn face and the way Mrs. Greer kept glancing up at the sky, worry etched into her every line. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up, rattling the roof and sending shivers through the barn. June Bug was the most restless of all. She paced her stall, sides heaving, tossing her head at every flash of lightning. Charlotte tried to soothe her, stroking the mare's neck and whispering the old lullaby Tom once sang. But June Bug flinched from her touch, sweat slicking her coat. "Something's wrong with her, Mom," Ruby said, voice quivering as she watched June Bug paw at the stall floor. "She's scared." "More than usual." Charlotte nodded, fighting the knot in her own stomach. She remembers something. Maybe storms, maybe... She didn't finish. The thought of what June Bug had endured, years of loss and fear, felt too big, too close. The rain hit hard and sudden, hammering the roof. The world outside dissolved into sheets of gray. Charlotte and Ruby moved quickly, tossing extra hay and checking every latch. Mrs. Greer, refusing to be chased off by bad weather, stayed to help. her old hands steady as she closed up the feed room and double-checked the generator. The storm raged on. Lightning split the sky, thunder shaking the ground. In the chaos, Junebug began to panic in earnest. Eyes rolling, nostrils flaring, hooves thudding against the stall door. "We've got to get her calm," Charlotte yelled over the din, grabbing a halter and rope. Ruby squeezed into the stall, arms open. "Easy, girl, it's okay. Please, Junebug, stay with us." But the mare was gone to her fear. Trapped in some memory Charlotte couldn't reach. With a terrified scream, Junebug reared up, smashing her hooves against the door until it cracked open. In a blur, she bolted past Charlotte, galloping down the aisle and into the wild, rain-lashed night. "Junebug, no!" Ruby's cry was ripped away by the wind. Charlotte's instincts took over. She grabbed coats, boots, and a flashlight, thrusting them at Ruby. "Stay with Mrs. Greer, I'll—" But Ruby was already running, boots splashing through the mud. "She'll be lost. I have to help her." Charlotte swore under her breath, then chased after her daughter, Mrs. Greer, close behind. The rain blinded them, stinging their skin, soaking them to the bone within minutes. They stumbled across the pasture, calling Junebug's name into the howling wind. Lightning revealed the world in flashes. Fences bent nearly flat, trees bent double, the creek rising fast at the bottom of the pasture. Charlotte's heart pounded. She remembered Tom's stories about how Junebug had disappeared the night of a storm, years ago, at this very river crossing. "Ruby, wait!" Charlotte shouted, catching sight of her daughter's silhouette darting through the gloom. Ruby didn't slow. She scrambled down the embankment toward the old crossing, mud sucking at her boots. "I see her! Mom, she's over there, by the water!" Junebug stood trembling at the edge of the creek, wild-eyed, refusing to go any further. The water roared past, swollen and angry, washing debris down the channel. Charlotte pushed past branches, nearly slipping, until she reached Ruby's side. "Don't go any closer," Charlotte said, grabbing Ruby's shoulder. "It's too dangerous." "We can't leave her," Ruby cried, tears mixing with the rain. Charlotte steadied herself, forced her voice calm. "We won't, but we have to move slow. Let me try." She inched toward Junebug, voice low and steady, just as Tom had taught her years ago. "It's okay. Junebug, you're not alone anymore. We're here. You don't have to run anymore." Junebug's ears flicked. She snorted, then, step by step, let Charlotte slip the halter over her head. The mare was trembling, but she didn't fight. Charlotte stroked her nose, feeling the terror thrumming beneath the skin, knowing it mirrored her own, the fear of losing family, of losing hope. Together, Charlotte and Ruby led Junebug away from the raging creek, back up the hill, and toward the safety of the barn. Mrs. Greer, waiting with the lantern, met them with open arms. "My word, you two look like drowned rats," she said, relief breaking through her stern tone. She hugged them tight. "Let's get inside before this storm decides to carry us off." Inside, the barn was battered but standing. The other horses whickered, crowding together for warmth. Ruby wrapped a blanket around Junebug and fed her apple slices by hand, her own hands shaking but gentle. Charlotte collapsed onto a bale of hay, the adrenaline draining out of her. She looked at Ruby, at Junebug, at Mrs. Greer, and felt a crack open inside. The pain and the fear pouring out, but also something softer, a sense of survival and togetherness. That night, as the storm finally began to break, Charlotte sat in the darkness with her arm around Ruby, listening to the slow, steady breathing of the horses. She realized that Junebug's trauma, The bolting, the fear, the need to run was her own. For years, Charlotte had lived with her ghosts, running from pain and suspicion. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to let the healing begin. The storm passed, leaving the world washed clean and raw. And for the first time, Charlotte dared to believe that they could face whatever came next, not alone, but together. The storm had swept away more than just the dust and debris of Bitter Mesa. In its wake, something different lingered, a strange electric tension, as if the land itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The morning after, the air felt fresh and raw, the sunlight striking sharp on puddles that still shivered with last night's rain. Charlotte barely slept. The events of the storm replayed in her mind. Junebug's panic, Ruby's wild chase, the fear of losing everything, again. As she watched Ruby sleeping curled beside Junebug's stall, the ache in Charlotte's chest deepened. But now, beneath the fear, a steely resolve was forming. She was done hiding, done letting the past and other people's lies control their lives. With Mrs. Greer's help, Charlotte spent the morning repairing storm damage. But her mind churned with Tom's old warning, the town's suspicions, and that crumpled receipt Ruby had discovered. What was Briggs hiding? And why did so many people seem willing to believe the worst about Tom? The answer began to take shape when Mrs. Greer brought over a battered, dusty box she'd kept in her attic since the fire that destroyed part of the old Briggs property years before. Inside were yellowed ledgers, stacks of letters, and, most intriguing, an envelope labeled "For Charlotte" in Tom's handwriting. Charlotte's hands shook as she opened it. The letter inside was dated just weeks before Tom's death. "Charlotte, if you ever find this, know I tried to make it right. Briggs has been selling horses under the table, keeping ledgers in the back room at the feed store. He threatened me to keep quiet, said he'd ruin us. But Junebug was never his to take. If anything happens to me, look for the blue ledger. Love you always. Tom." Charlotte's heart pounded. A blue ledger, the feed store. It was something real, proof that Tom had been trying to expose Briggs, not cover for him. She didn't hesitate. By late afternoon, she left Ruby with Mrs. Greer and drove to the old feed store on Main Street. The place was nearly empty, its owner, Mr. Carter, reading a newspaper behind the counter. "I need to see the back room, Mr. Carter," Charlotte said, her voice firm. He looked up, eyebrows raised. "Why's that?" "It's about the horses. It's about Tom. Please, I need to know if there's a blue ledger back there. Tom said it would clear his name." For a long moment, Carter just studied her. Finally, he sighed and nodded toward the back. "A lot of secrets in this town, Charlotte. I hope you're ready for what you find." The room was cramped and dusty, boxes stacked high. It took Charlotte nearly half an hour of searching, but finally, tucked behind a crate of fencing nails, she found it. A blue, leather-bound ledger, its spine cracked, pages stuffed with names, dates, and numbers. And there, in bold writing, was the proof. Records of horse sales, including Junebug, all signed by Luke Briggs. Charlotte's hands trembled as she snapped photos of every page with her phone. As she left the store, her mind raced. This was enough. She had what she needed to clear Tom's name. But it wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about finally facing down the man who had tried to ruin her family. She drove straight to the sheriff's office, ledger in hand. The sheriff, a stern woman named Miriam Daly, listened carefully as Charlotte laid out everything. Tom's letter, the ledger, the threats from Briggs. "Leave the ledger with me," Daly said, eyes narrowed. If this checks out, Charlotte will reopen the case. News traveled fast. By the next morning, Bitter Mesa was buzzing. People gathered at the edge of the ranch, curiosity and guilt battling on their faces. But it was Ruby who insisted on joining Charlotte at the emergency town meeting called by the sheriff. Mrs. Greer came too, standing as a silent pillar beside them. Luke Briggs was already there, blustering and red-faced, surrounded by a handful of loyal supporters. But the mood had shifted. Charlotte could feel it. The way people looked at her now, searching for the truth, maybe even hoping for it. Sheriff Daly stood up. "We've got evidence here that casts doubt on the stories about Tom Walker. We have records showing Luke Briggs orchestrated the sale and disappearance of horses, including June Bug, while blaming Tom. We're reopening the investigation." The room erupted into whispers and gasps. Luke's face went white, then purple with rage. "That's a lie. She's framing me!" Before Charlotte could speak, Ruby stepped forward, voice shaking but clear. "You lied about my dad, Mr. Briggs. We found the ledger. You took June Bug and tried to blame us. That's not right." The room stilled. Even Luke couldn't look Ruby in the eyes. Mrs. Greer raised her cane, speaking in a voice that carried across the crowd. "I remember the night June Bug disappeared. Tom was here with me. Luke, you were the one out riding late, not him. It's time you stopped hiding." The evidence and testimony were overwhelming. Luke tried to push back, but the tide had turned. Sheriff Daly signaled her deputies, and in moments, Luke Briggs was in handcuffs, shouting protests that nobody wanted to hear anymore. People turned to Charlotte, their faces shifting from suspicion to shame, some offering apologies, others silent, but all knowing something deep had changed. Mrs. Greer squeezed Charlotte's hand. Ruby, tears streaming down her cheeks, hugged her mother tight. The truth had come to Bitter Mesa at last, and as Charlotte looked around, at her daughter, her neighbors, the sun breaking through the storm clouds, she realized that the ghosts of the past had finally lost their power. But the healing, she knew, was just beginning. For the first time in what felt like years, Bitter Mesa seemed to breathe easier. The tension that had wrapped itself around the ranch, the town, and Charlotte's very heart began to unwind. Thread by stubborn thread. Luke Briggs's arrest sent ripples through the whole community. Some neighbors apologized in halting voices. Others arrived at the ranch gate with casseroles, pie, or just awkward handshakes, looking Charlotte in the eyes for the first time in months. The day after the town meeting, Charlotte and Ruby walked the property together, the grass still bright from the recent storms. The air was clean, with a faint sweetness from blooming wildflowers at the fence lines. Ruby skipped ahead, hair bouncing, pausing now and then to reach out and touch the horses as they grazed in the morning light. June Bug stood close, her head lowered to sniff Ruby's palm, calmer than Charlotte had ever seen her. Charlotte reached out, stroking the mare's neck, feeling the warm skin and steady breath. "She's really coming back to herself, isn't she?" she said, her voice soft. Ruby nodded, grinning. "She's not scared anymore. She trusts us, Mom." It wasn't just June Bug who was healing. The other horses, once anxious and skittish, had settled into a gentle rhythm, nickering at feeding time and dozing in the sun. Even the chestnut gelding, who'd shied away from every sound, now followed Ruby everywhere, his eyes soft and hopeful. Repairs began in earnest. Neighbors who once shunned Charlotte now arrived with hammers, nails, and lumber. The barn door was rebuilt stronger than before, the fences patched and painted. Mrs. Greer took charge of the kitchen, organizing a rotation of hot meals that seemed to show up every night without fail. The ranch slowly transformed from a place haunted by loss into a hive of laughter, hard work, and the easy camaraderie that only comes when burdens are finally shared. One afternoon, as Charlotte weeded the vegetable garden, she looked up to find old Mr. Salazar, the rancher who'd once accused Tom of theft, standing at the gate, hat in hand. His face was red, his voice gruff. "I was wrong about your husband, Charlotte," he said, clearing his throat. "And about you. I hope you'll forgive an old man who let fear make him a fool." Charlotte set down her gloves and met his eyes. "We've all been through a lot. I appreciate you coming here, Mr. Salazar. That means something." She shook his hand, her grip strong, and felt the final piece of her isolation begin to slip away. As the days grew longer and the world warmed, Charlotte and Ruby created a special corner in the barn, a memorial for Tom. They hung his old hat on a hook, placed a framed photograph of him and June Bug beside it, and set out a battered pair of boots worn soft with use. Ruby brought in fresh wildflowers every morning, and together they lit a small lantern each night, a beacon of memory and gratitude. One evening, Ruby asked if she could write a letter to her dad. She sat at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, tongue poking out as she concentrated. When she finished, she folded the paper and tucked it inside Tom's journal. "Do you want to read it to me?" Charlotte asked. Ruby shook her head, a shy smile curving her lips. "Maybe another day, but I feel better now." That same night, Charlotte stood in the barn alone, June Bug's steady breathing the only sound in the quiet. She ran her hands along the mare's back, marveling at how strong she was becoming. How the scars, both seen and unseen, were healing over, softened by time and love. For the first time since Tom's death, Charlotte let herself cry, not tears of fear or despair, but of relief, hope, and release. With the truth finally out, Charlotte's sense of purpose returned. She threw herself into the daily work, fixing up the ranch and helping the neighbors who had once doubted her. When Mrs. Greer mentioned that a neighboring farm had lost a pair of ponies in the last storm, Charlotte and Ruby volunteered to help search, saddling up June Bug and the little dun pony and riding out across the fields together. The search ended in success, and the grateful owners promised a week's worth of eggs and a basket of sweet corn in thanks. The ranch became more than just a home. It became a haven. Word spread that the Walker's place was where folks could come for help, or just to talk, or to find a safe landing if life had thrown them off course. Charlotte and Ruby welcomed it, opening their barn to lost animals, and sometimes to lost people too. By early summer, June Bug had grown strong enough to carry children for riding lessons. The sound of laughter and hoofbeats echoed across the pasture as Ruby led her schoolmates in slow, careful circles on the gray mare's broad back. June Bug, once a shadow of herself, now moved with calm confidence, her ears flicking contentedly at every kind word and gentle touch. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and the whole community gathered for a barbecue in the Walker's yard, Charlotte stood beside Ruby, watching the children play tag among the horses and the adults swap stories around the fire. For the first time in years, Charlotte felt at peace, tired but deeply satisfied. Ruby leaned against her, whispering, "Dad would have loved this, wouldn't he?" Charlotte nodded, blinking away tears. "He would have, and he'd be proud of you, of us, of all of this." Together, Mother and daughter stood in the twilight, surrounded by friends, laughter, and a future that no longer felt so uncertain. The ranch had become a symbol of healing, proof that wounds could mend and broken families could find their way home again. And in the quiet that followed, as the stars blinked on above Bitter Mesa, Charlotte finally allowed herself to believe. Forgiveness and love could outlast any storm, and the best days still lay ahead. Summer waned, and Bitter Mesa settled into a gentle, hopeful rhythm. For Charlotte, each morning began not with dread, but with quiet gratitude. The ranch was alive again, horses healthy, fences mended, laughter and voices echoing in the cool dawn. It was a new chapter, but Charlotte knew the journey wasn't finished. Healing, she learned, was a choice made day by day, moment by moment. She found herself drawn often to the small memorial in the barn's corner. Some evenings, after all the chores were done and the stars were thick in the sky, she'd sit on a hay bale beside Tom's boots and hat, June bug quietly munching hay nearby. The pain of loss hadn't vanished. It never would. But it had changed, softened, as if the hard edge had been worn smooth by the work of living. On one such night, Charlotte turned Tom's old journal over in her hands, flipping through the worn pages, her fingers pausing on entries about storms survived, neighbors helped, the joy in a newborn foal. She realized how much Tom had faced quietly, fears, mistakes, doubts, and how in the end he had chosen to trust in his family and the land. Ruby found her there, silent and reflective. "Are you thinking about Dad?" Charlotte smiled. "Every day. I think about all he taught me, about horses, about this place, but mostly about being brave enough to tell the truth, even when it hurts. That's how you move forward." Ruby sat close, head resting on Charlotte's shoulder. "You always say forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. What does it mean then?" Charlotte let the silence settle before answering. "Forgiveness is letting go of what you can't change. It's choosing not to let anger or hurt poison what's left. When you forgive, it's not for the other person. It's for you, so you can live again." Ruby thought about that. "Do you think people will ever really forgive us for all those rumors?" Charlotte's gaze wandered out into the starlit yard, where laughter still drifted from the house. "Some will, some won't. But we don't need everyone's forgiveness. We just need to know we did right. People see the truth now, Ruby. We stood up for ourselves and for Dad. That's what matters." Days passed, and Charlotte noticed the subtle shifts in herself and in her daughter. The burdens they'd carried, grief, anger, shame, grew lighter. Where fear once lived, courage took root. Where bitterness threatened, kindness bloomed. She saw it in Ruby, too. Her easy smile, the way she welcomed new friends from school, her willingness to help lost animals and children who wandered up the ranch drive. One afternoon, Charlotte was invited to speak at Ruby's middle school, part of a Heroes in the Community event. She almost declined, nerves knotting her stomach, but Ruby squeezed her hand. "Tell them our story, Mom. It might help someone." Standing in front of the class, Charlotte's voice wavered at first, but soon settled into a steady, honest rhythm. She spoke about loss and love, about finding the strength to start over, and about facing down the shadows of the past. When you love something, an animal, a person, a place, you fight for it. But sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is forgive. Not because it's easy, but because it's the only way to set yourself free. She looked at Ruby, pride shining in her daughter's eyes. We learned that when you save a lost horse, sometimes you save yourself too. Afterward, students and teachers lingered to thank her. A few told their own stories of loss and healing, of mistakes made and forgiveness granted. Charlotte left the school with her heart full, realizing how powerful it could be to share even the most painful truths. That evening, as Charlotte and Ruby sat on the porch, Mrs. Greer joined them. The old woman had been a rock through all their trials, her wisdom and quiet support never wavering. "You know," Mrs. Greer said, rocking gently in her chair, "families like yours are what hold this town together. Not because you never make mistakes, but because you keep going. You show the rest of us how to stand tall, even when life knocks you flat." Charlotte smiled, emotion rising in her throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Greer. I think I finally understand what Tom meant when he said Bitter Mesa wasn't about land or cattle. It was about the people who choose to make a life here, even when it's hard." They sat quietly, listening to the evening's peace. The sound of crickets and the low nicker of horses drifting on the breeze. Before bed, Charlotte walked the fence line with Ruby, lanterns swinging between them. They talked about dreams for the ranch, a new garden, more rescued animals, maybe even opening the place for kids in trouble. Somewhere they could find what Charlotte and Ruby had nearly lost: safety, hope, and the chance to begin again. That night, Ruby wrote in her own journal, a habit she'd picked up from Tom. Sometimes, when the world tries to break you, you find out you're stronger than you think. And sometimes, when you save a lost horse, you save yourself too. Charlotte smiled as she read her daughter's words. The truth rang through them. Simple, profound, hard-won. They'd survived more than just storms and gossip. They'd survived themselves, their own doubts and pain. The strongest families, Charlotte realized, aren't perfect. They're honest. They face the truth, forgive when they can, and lean on each other when life gets rough. They know the difference between letting go and giving up. As sleep finally claimed her, Charlotte felt a deep, abiding peace. They'd come through the darkness together. And whatever tomorrow brought, she knew they could handle it. Side by side, heart by heart, strong as Bitter Mesa itself. Summer faded into fall, and Bitter Mesa found itself transformed, not only by the rains and sunlight, but by the long journey of healing that had swept through the Walker Ranch and beyond. Each sunrise now brought a fresh sense of possibility. The air tasted different, brisk and clean, as if all the bitterness had finally washed away, leaving only hope and the smell of cut hay and morning coffee. Months passed, and with each day, Charlotte's ranch grew into something new, something more than it had ever been before. The fences gleamed with new paint. The vegetable garden burst with late tomatoes and beans, and a cheerful sign hung by the drive. Walker Sanctuary, home for horses and hearts. It began quietly. First, a neighbor's battered gelding, half-starved and skittish, was brought to the barn for a second chance. Then came a stray dog, found wandering on the highway, who quickly claimed a spot under the kitchen table. And when Mrs. Greer mentioned a troubled boy from town who needed somewhere to go after school, Charlotte didn't hesitate. She set a place for him at the table and let him help with chores, watching him soften in the presence of animals and kind words. The news spread. The Walker Ranch became known as a haven, a place where both animals and people could come to mend. There were always new faces, lost souls, stray pets, horses in need of gentleness, and a safe stall. Charlotte welcomed them all, knowing what it meant to need help and to find it offered without judgment. Junebug, once the most broken of them all, stood at the center of this new life. She had grown strong and serene, her coat now sleek and her eyes clear. Where she once trembled at every sound, now she led children's riding lessons, her steps measured and patient, never letting a child fall. Ruby, now the picture of happiness, spent hours teaching neighborhood kids how to care for the horses, her own laughter rising above the clatter of hooves and happy shouts. One bright Saturday morning, the ranch gathered for a celebration, the anniversary of June Bug's return. Friends and neighbors arrived in trucks and on horseback, arms full of food, flowers, and old photos. Mrs. Greer baked 3 pies. Mr. Salazar brought a fiddler who played songs that echoed through the hills. Even the sheriff, Miriam Daly, stopped by to offer her congratulations and a basket of apples. Charlotte watched the festivities from the porch, her heart full. She saw Ruby leading a group of children through the pasture, June Bug moving like a gray shadow beside them. The boy from town, once withdrawn and angry, was grinning as he brushed the little dun pony. Horses grazed quietly in the warm sun, dogs dozed in the shade, and the sounds of life, music, laughter, voices, wove together in a tapestry that felt like a blessing. Later, as dusk painted the mesa in lavender and gold, Charlotte called everyone together by the big cottonwood tree. She spoke quietly, but her words carried across the gathered crowd. A year ago we nearly lost everything, each other, this land, and our hope. But sometimes, when it feels like all is lost, life gives us a second chance. Not just to rebuild fences or barns, but to mend our hearts and help others do the same. This ranch has become more than just a home for us. It's become a place where we can all start again, no matter what's happened before. She took Ruby's hand, squeezing it gently. We couldn't have done it without you. Our friends, our neighbors, this whole community. Thank you for giving us another chance, and for believing in the truth, even when it was hard to see. As the sun slipped behind the mesa, Ruby stepped forward, her voice strong. My dad used to say that horses aren't the only ones who get lost. People do too. And when you find someone who's lost, you don't turn them away. You bring them home, and you love them until they remember who they are. There were tears in many eyes as the sky darkened, but they were good tears. Tears of gratitude, forgiveness, and promise. The party continued into the night, lanterns glowing in the trees, fireflies rising from the grass. Charlotte and Mrs. Greer sipped coffee by the barn, watching the last of the children race the ponies up and down the fence line. You did good, girl, Mrs. Greer said, patting Charlotte's hand. Tom would be proud. Charlotte smiled, a deep warmth spreading through her. I think he would too. But I'm proud of all of us, for not giving up, for facing the past, for letting go. Before bed, Charlotte made her way to the memorial in the barn. She hung a new photograph on the wall. This one of Ruby, June Bug, and the children, sunlight on their faces, laughter frozen in time. She whispered a quiet thank you, not just to Tom, but to every twist of fate that had brought them here. She understood now, in her bones, that the real legacy of the ranch wasn't just land or horses or even the stories people would tell. It was courage, the courage to confront what was broken, to shine light on old hurts, and to offer kindness instead of judgment. It was community, built not on secrets or blame, but on honesty and support. It was love, fierce and forgiving, holding fast even in the wildest storms. Bitter Mesa would always have its shadows, but now, Charlotte knew, the dawn always came. As she tucked Ruby in that night, the girl sleepy and content, Charlotte whispered, We're going to be all right. The best is still ahead. And out beyond the window, under a sky bursting with stars, the Walker Ranch stood, whole, hopeful, and alive, a testament to the power of truth, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family and community.